Libs of TikTok dug up another good one for us. This time it's a self-described racial justice advocate named Ali Henney, who apparently has been hired to give workshops on anti-racism in the past. And in a video which has gone viral this week, Henney explains how punctuality is a feature of white culture, and it's racist for white people to expect that non-white people will show up on time to things. Listen.
As a racial justice advocate, I'm often invited to give talks or to do workshops where I talk to white people about race. A big part of my practice is to offer real-life stories, examples, that type of thing, that help white people to be able to identify white supremacy in everyday life. My husband's family is white, and I often use the cultural differences between my family and his family as a way to help white people see their whiteness. There's one example that I use that always gets a ton of pushback. My husband and I were late to our first Thanksgiving with his family. I say late because it started at 12. We got there at 12:10, but whenever we got there at 12:10, everybody was already sat down and eating. I didn't know that. I use this illustration to point out that different cultures have different understandings of time, lateness, and what it means to be polite. Without fail, a white person will push back and say that lateness is impolite. I always use this as a teachable moment. I usually ask a series of pointed questions that challenge their assumptions. Sometimes it takes a lot of work, but by the end, they're able to identify how white cultural dominance works in this one small area of life, which opens the door for them to start peeling the onion.
Oh, she didn't know that. She didn't know that if something starts at 12 and you get there 10 minutes after the thing starts, you're late. Now, you might think that this is just the dictionary definition of late. You might wonder what she could have imagined late means if it doesn't apply to a circumstance where she is arriving to a thing after the thing has already started. Had she never encountered the word late before? Was she unfamiliar with the concept? Had she lived her whole life and never been introduced to the concept of being late? Now, she says she had a different concept of time. Well, what is her concept? Now, it's true that time is relative in the sense that you can have a gravitational time dilation where time slows down as the force of gravity grows stronger. But I don't think Einstein's theory of relativity ever suggested that time is relative depending on the culture you grew up in. But before we expand on that idea, let's listen to the racial justice advocate's follow-up video where she responds to some of the criticism she has heard against this idea. Listen.
Hey, this is my own comment, and it's in reference to the video that I did about punctuality and white culture. I'm pretty sure if you tap it, it'll take you back to the original video. But I wanted to expound on this a little bit. Specifically, I wanted to challenge white people to expand their thinking on this topic. The most common type of comment that I saw in the original video was some version of, I'm white and I'm always late. I don't think that people were trying to refute the premise of the original video, but I do think that white people were trying to distance themselves from this particular feature of white culture. Here's where I want y'all to dig a little bit deeper. This is something that I notice white people do a lot whenever we talk about whiteness. There's an acknowledgement that a certain type of whiteness exists, but also an attempt to say, oh no, I'm not that type of white person. Here's the problem with that. A lot of times whenever you try to distance yourself from an aspect of whiteness, you're actually reinforcing that aspect of whiteness. So going back to the original example, when you say that you're late, you're still operating under dominant culture constructs of time and punctuality. You're still being white about it. Here's what you missed. There are people who view the world very differently from you. And so you have to train your brain to be able to see things from a different perspective.
You know, this is something that I notice black people do a lot. That's why I really want to challenge black people to dig a little bit deeper. I need you black people to listen and learn from me about how you should be behaving. Because, really, you're being a little black about it right now. See, it sounds bad when I speak that way to black people, and it's no different when this woman speaks the same way to white people. Okay? It's just exactly the same thing. Like, we don't need your lectures, especially when you're scolding us for objectively positive traits like timeliness and punctuality, which is an unintentional compliment that plenty of us don't actually deserve anyway. But this idea that basic etiquette and politeness and professionalism are constructs of whiteness or white culture is pervasive. We can't even give this woman credit for having the originality to come up with something so wacky on her own. She's just repeating the sort of drivel that she's picked up from the anti-racist racket. You probably remember that infamous chart put together by the Smithsonian claiming that things like hard work and professionalism are white constructs. The museum took that chart down in embarrassment after people noticed it and reacted the way normal people react to insane things like that. But the idea hasn't gone away. In fact, just a few months ago, Time magazine published an interview with someone named Leah Goodridge, who's the author of a UCLA Law Review article titled Professionalism as a Racial Construct. And the claim is that standards of professionalism, of which timeliness and punctuality are usually a part, are thinly veiled excuses to be racist. So our friend Allie Henny didn't make this up. She's not innovative enough to come up with her own ways to be dumb. Instead, she's parroting the dumbness she's heard elsewhere. But that doesn't make it any less dumb, of course. So have you ever browsed in incognito mode? It's probably not as incognito as you might think. And why would it be? Incognito mode has made big tech companies a fortune by tracking your movements online. So how do you actually make yourself as invisible as possible online? Well, you use ExpressVPN like I do. It turns out that even in incognito mode, your online activity still gets tracked and data brokers still get to buy and sell your data. One of these data points is your IP address. Data harvesters use your IP to uniquely identify you and your location. But with ExpressVPN, your connection gets rerouted through an encrypted server and your IP address is masked. Every time you connect to ExpressVPN, you get a random IP address shared by many other ExpressVPN customers. That makes it harder for third parties to identify you or harvest your data. Best of all, ExpressVPN is super easy to use no matter what device you're on, phone, laptop, or smart TV. All you got to do is tap one button for instant protection. So if you really want to go incognito and protect your privacy, secure yourself with the #1 rated VPN, visit expressvpn.com/Walsh and get 3 months free. That's expressvpn.com/Walsh. Again, that's expressvpn.com/Walsh to learn more. And the first problem with the race hustlers' claim that punctuality is a feature of white culture is that in most other circumstances, race hustlers tell us that white people don't have a culture. Just a few days ago, at the start of Black History Month, Twitter was full of these anti-racist types informing us that white people don't get a History Month or any other specific cultural recognition because whiteness is not a culture. That's what they say. Qasim Rashid, who's a left-wing activist who's currently running for Congress, announced that, quote, "There's no such thing as white culture." He said that, there can be Italian culture and French culture and Irish culture and so on, but not white culture. Now, of course, if that's true of white people, then it's just as true of black people. White is an umbrella that includes many different people from many different countries, separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles. Black is also an umbrella that includes many different people from many different countries, separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles. So people can have different opinions about whether it makes sense to talk about the culture of an entire race of people, regardless of their nation of origin. But wherever you land on that question, the answer has to apply to white and black equally. But left-wing race activists answer this question like they answer every question, depending on the ideological needs of the moment. And for somebody like Allie Henny, white people have a culture when it comes time to scold them for a perceived flaw, but white people definitely do not have a culture in the sense of something that should be celebrated and preserved. In fact, I feel quite sure that she would cringe in horror if a white person ever said to her that we should preserve and celebrate white culture. In that case, she would say, white culture doesn't exist. You can't even preserve it. It's not. So white culture only exists when we're criticizing it. In other words, white is not a culture unless you need white to be a culture for the purpose of lecturing white people. Yet, if we are apparently recognizing white as a culture for the purpose of this discussion, I would not personally include punctuality as a unique feature of it. As much as I appreciate the compliment, nobody I work with would be able to stomach my hypocrisy if I said, "Oh yeah, we white folks, we're always on time." Always. That's one thing about us white folks. We're never late. I haven't been on time to record my show, for example, one single day since approximately 2019. And I'm not even joking. Now, although I do appreciate the excuse that this TikTok racial justice advocate has now given me. If anybody complains that I'm late, I can now accuse them of upholding white supremacy. I never thought of that before, but come to think of it, I think she's right. Indeed, my chronic lateness is really just my own personal effort to decenter my whiteness. So if anybody complains about it, I can say, well, excuse me for decentering my whiteness. And really, anyone who does complain about it is essentially, for all intents and purposes, morally speaking, Adolf Hitler. That is the inevitable conclusion that we must draw. Either that, or the expectation that you show up on time is simply a basic standard of conduct that applies to everybody. And if you fall short of that standard, it's not because you're unfamiliar with the customs of white people, but rather because of your own personal shortcomings. Now, I can see why Allie may prefer the latter option. May not prefer the latter option, I should say, and the one about the shortcomings. I don't prefer it either. But at least I have the courage to admit my own shortcomings, even if I won't do anything to correct them. But that much cannot be said about Allie Henny, the racial justice advocate. And that is why she is today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.